welcome to this episode of Geography Girl, and ooh, do I have a good one for you today. This is one of the most iconic photos to have come out of the Second World War, and it is taken by Lee Miller, who was having a bath in Hitler's bathtub. I came across the story of Lee Miller when I saw her movie Lee, which was played by Kate Winslet, and is a story about an incredible woman who went to the front lines during the Second World War to take pictures of the realities of war. Let me get into the episode. There are countless images of Adolf Hitler that history has preserved, shouting into crowds, framed by banners, standing rigidly in a uniform, saluted by oceans of raising arms. These images were not accidents, they were manufactured carefully, obsessively, because authoritarian power depends on being seen in very specific ways. And then there is this photo of Hitler's bathtub. Not Hitler in the bathtub, that is the crucial point, but his bathtub is occupied by somebody else. A naked Lee Miller sits calmly in the porcelain bath of Hitler's Munich apartment. Her muddy boots are placed deliberately on the bathtub, on the bath mat. On the wall above her hangs a portrait of Hitler himself, staring down at the scene he probably could never have imagined. His most private space, casually, almost indifferently, taken over. The photo is shocking, but not because it is explicit or violent. It's shocking because it is intimate, and intimacy is one thing that dictators cannot stand. This image matters not as a curiosity or a clever piece of wartime irony, but because it exposes something fundamental about how authoritarian power works and how it can be undone. To understand this photo, you have to understand that Lee Miller did not stumble in this moment. Miller was not a tourist nor a soldier passing through, and not a passive observer. She had been a model in the 1920s, a muse in surrealist circles, and then deliberately reinvented herself as a war correspondent for Vogue. By 1945, she had already witnessed some of the worst horrors of the war, including liberation of concentration camps like Dachau and Balkenwald. On April the 30th, 1945, the same day Hitler killed himself, Miller and photographer David E. Sherman entered Hitler's private apartment in Munich. They had just come from Dachau, and that matters. The dirt on Miller's boots is not metaphorical, it is real, physical dirt carried from the place that existed because of the man whose bathroom she was now using. The photograph that followed was staged, but not in a way that was frivolous. It was deliberate. Miller chose to bathe there. She chose how to sit. She chose how to leave the boots on the mat. It was not about comfort, it was about enforcing meaning. Dictators rely on distance, physical distance, emotional distance, symbolic distance. A dictator must appear elevated, monumental, and untouchable. He is seen on balconies, on podiums, and in grand halls, and even his own supposed simplicity is carefully created. And the bathroom destroys that illusion instantly. Bathrooms are where bodies are exposed and where control slips, where the state has no role to play. They are places of vulnerability, privacy, and a routine human need. Nobody looks powerful in a bathroom. Hitler was very careful about this. His public image was tightly controlled, disciplined, aesthetic, and strangely sexless. Domestic life barely featured in Nazi imagery, and when it did, it was heavily stylized. The idea of Hitler bathing, undressing, and tending to his own body was incompatible with his mythology. The photograph has a single detail that turns it from strange to devastating. It's the boots. They are heavy, practical, and visibly dirty, and they sit on the bath mat. Earlier that day, Miller had walked through Dachau. The system was built on Nazi obsessions with cleanliness, purity, order, and hygiene, concepts that were grotesquely weaponized with racial ideology, and yet the reality was disease, filth, mass death, and moral rot. Placing her boots on Hitler's bathroom, Miller collapses that contradiction. The dirt of the camps enters the private sanctum of the man that was responsible. The cleanliness of the bath cannot wash it away. The mat does not protect the floor. The boundary between the civilized domestic comfort and industrialized atrocity is dissolved. At first glance, it's tempting to read the photograph through the lens of nudity. Lee Miller is naked, yes, but she's not sexualized. Her posture is relaxed, almost bored, and there is no attempt to perform for the camera. This is not an image designed for male desire, it is an image of control, and this matters deeply in the context of Nazism. Nazi ideology was obsessed with hypermasculinity, discipline, domination, and rigid gender roles. Women's bodies were politicized, regulated, and instrumented, but never autonomous. Here, a woman occupies Hitler's most private space on her own terms. She is not framed as submissive or transgressive in a sexual sense. She is simply there. The power inversion is total. The dictator is gone. His image remains only as a framed portrait on the wall. The living, breathing human in the room is a woman he would have considered inferior. and she is utterly at ease. And this is why the photograph feels so destabilising. Looking closely at the composition, you'll notice something quite unsettling: Hitler's portrait hanging above the bathtub. Now, this photo was taken on the 30th of April 1945, which was the very day that Hitler and Eva Braun died by suicide in their bunker in Berlin. Miller didn't know it in that moment, but Hitler had committed suicide that same day, marking the definitive end of the Third Reich. After staging the now iconic photograph, Lee Miller didn't immediately leave Hitler's apartment. Accounts from Miller and her colleagues indicate that they continued to explore the private residence at 16 Prinz Regent and Platz, documenting its furnishings, decor, and items both for journalistic and historical purposes. She described the flat as an ordinary, semi-corner, old-fashioned building on a Platz. Almost anyone with a medium income and no heirlooms could have become the proprietor of this flat. The place was in perfect condition, including electricity and hot water available, and an electric refrigerator. It wasn't empty enough to be a sublet as it stood, but for a quarter of an hour's cleaning cupboards, it would have made it ready for a new tenant who didn't mind linen and a silver marked AH. That's what she wrote in her diary. Miller and Sherman spent the night in the apartment, using Hitler's toilets and taking his bath and generally making ourselves at home, which is a quote from her diary. The place was full of barred doll art, Miller wrote. It was mediocre, as were the paintings on the walls. But in the hallway, the pair found cupboards holding crystal and china, a rubber plant, and a black plaster eagle with folded wings. Here, Miller realised, was Hitler's real home and his armed headquarters in every city of Europe, his physical as well as spiritual home. The interior of Hitler's apartment, showing King George VI mug. The mug, which played the national anthem when lifted up, was a gift to Hitler from the Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain in November 1938. There was a British passport on the table, but its origins were unknown. His bedroom was hung with chintz and the bed was upholstered with the same material, wrote Miller. There was a plaster cast of Hitler's hands lying on the table. After leaving the apartment, Miller continued her work in Munich and surrounding areas, photographing the aftermath of Nazi rule, including empty streets, abandoned offices, and destroyed infrastructure. The photographs taken that day, particularly the bathtub image, were later published in Vogue and in Life magazines, but Miller initially hesitated to release them widely, feeling that they might be too provocative. Over time, the images became iconic symbols of Allied victory and war reportage, but they did have an impact on Miller, who was deeply traumatized by what she saw in the concentration camps and on the front line. As depicted in the movie, son didn't know much about what his mother had done until she passed away, and he found the negatives in her attic after she passed. She was deeply traumatized by what she saw and rarely talked about it and turned to alcohol. I would highly recommend going to watch the movie. I was literally gobsmacked. And that's it for today's episode. If you liked it, give us a like and subscribe for more. I bring out new episodes every Tuesday. Goodbye. Bye.